Welcome to the Clifford Lead Awareness in Construction program. This is a review of the Ontario lead regulations. The duties of an owner under the Occupational Health and Safety Act are: under Section 30, before beginning a project, the owner shall determine whether any designated substances are present at the project site and shall prepare a list of all designated substances that are present at the site. The owner must provide a designated substance survey. It must be by a competent person. They must walk throughout the building or work area to identify suspect material. Location of suspect materials. Collection of samples for analysis. Identify condition of materials, and provide a report. In the module overview, it must include typical lead uses, routes of exposure, or how it can get into you, health effects once it gets into you, legislation and guidelines that apply, lead operations, procedures for working with lead. What is it? Lead? Lead is a naturally occurring metal. It's widespread, inexpensive, it's a blue, gray lustrous solid, and it is odorless. Where is lead used? It was used for drinking water piping systems until 1975. It was used in the city service line until 1953, London. It was part of the National Plumbing Code until 1975. It was also used for soldering until 1990, but it's now prohibited by National Plumbing Code, 1990. Lead was used to make paints dry quickly, wear well, and to make colors vibrant. The soft, gray metal makes an excellent white pigment. Paint made with white lead pigment provided a high-quality, durable protective coating. The amount and kind of lead varied in different types of paint. How is lead in paint now regulated? The Liquid Coating Materials regulations were enacted under the Hazardous Products Act in 1976 to restrict the lead content of paints and other liquid coatings on furniture, household products, children's products, and exterior and interior surfaces of any building frequented by children to 0.5% by weight. The Canadian Paint and Coatings Association, CPCA, the National Trade Association for Canada's paint manufacturers, recommended that the Canadian paint industry voluntarily stop using any lead compounds in consumer paints by the end of 1990. Over the years, the amount of lead in paint has continued to decrease, due to the cooperative efforts of government and industry. Regulations to decrease the amount of lead in paints and other liquid coating materials to 0.06% by weight fix this are expected to be in or they really in place by the end of 2002. Where was lead used? Other applications: lead acid batteries, bridges, welding, brazing or high-temperature cutting, abrasive blasting, coatings and abrasive material, powder-actuated tools, presently used as lead styphnate, 0.1 to 1.5%. Two routes of entry are of major concern. The first is inhalation. When lead is disturbed, it can generate lead in the form of fumes, dust or mists. Any work you do that disturbs lead should be considered hazardous, especially these listed. Two routes of entry are of major concern: inhalation and ingestion. Airborne lead particles in the form of fumes, dusts and mists can be inhaled deeply into the lungs if they are small enough, less than 5 micrometers. Larger particles are trapped in the upper respiratory tract, cleared from the lungs, and subsequently swallowed. You can also swallow lead dust if it gets in your food or drinks, or if you eat or smoke without washing your hands first. Because early symptoms are general in nature, lead exposure is not suspected. Here are some definitions you should remember. Anemia. A reduction in red blood cells or anemia. Your blood has a decreased ability to transport oxygen, resulting in increased fatigue and change in skin color. Colic. An early sign of lead exposure. Causes abdominal pain, constipation, cramps, nausea, vomiting, anorexia and weight loss. Kidney failure. Causes damage to kidney filtration mechanism, eventually leading to kidney failure. Blood pressure. Studies consistently show increase in blood pressure. Abortion. In females. Because early symptoms are general in nature, lead exposure is not suspected in the following: male fertility, decreased sperm counts, evidence not as strong, nervous system effects. Most classic symptom is effects on the nervous system, especially extremities. Wrist drop or foot drop are classical signs. Tremors begin. High exposures can also affect the central nervous system, causing brain hemorrhage. Also non-specific symptoms such as headache, fatigue, irritability, loss of concentration, etc. The Occupational Health and Safety Act sets out the duties of employers and others to protect workers. The following are: take all reasonable precautions to protect the health and safety of workers. Ensure equipment, materials and protective equipment are maintained in good condition. Provide information, instruction and supervision. Acquaint a worker or a person in authority over a worker with any hazard in the work and in the handling, storage, use, disposal and transport of any article, device, equipment or a biological, chemical or physical agent. The regulation for construction projects also states that employers must perform necessary tests and observations, wear protective clothing and use personal protective equipment or devices. A worker required to wear protective clothing shall be adequately instructed and trained in the care and use of the clothing, equipment or device before wearing or using it. The regulation for construction projects also says, washing facilities with clean water, soap and individual towels must be available. Adequate ventilation must be in place. If ventilation is not practicable, respiratory protective equipment shall be provided to and used by the workers. If the dissemination of dust is a hazard to a worker, the dust shall be adequately controlled, or each worker who may be exposed to the hazard shall be provided with adequate personal protective equipment. The purpose of the legislation and guidelines are to assist workplaces to protect workers from exposure to lead. Ministry of Labor inspectors will assess workplace situations against the relevant provisions of the Act and regulations, and while they do not enforce the guideline, they may refer to it in determining whether the relevant laws have been complied with. How much lead in paint or primer is too much? Some authorities say any amount of lead in a paint or surface coating can be hazardous and lead precautions are required. The Environmental Abatement Council of Ontario says less than 0.1% lead is considered low levels if disturbed in non-aggressive manner. Classifying lead operations. Employers, supervisors and workers should be able to recognize and classify lead operations in order to provide appropriate respirators, measures and procedures. In the lead regulations, Type 1 operations include application of lead-containing coatings with a brush or roller, removal of lead-containing coatings with a chemical gel or paste and fibrous laminated cloth wrap, removal of lead-containing coatings or materials using a power tool that has an effective dust collection system equipped with a HEPA filter, installation or removal of lead-containing sheet metal, installation or removal of lead-containing packing, babbitt or similar material, removal of lead-containing coatings or materials using non-powered hand tools, other than manual scraping or sanding. Soldering. Effective implies that the dust collection system should be capable of controlling airborne lead concentration levels to below 0.05 milligrams per cubic meter. Employers should follow manufacturers' recommendations and maintenance specifications for optimal function of the dust collection system. Type 2A operations consist of welding or high-temperature cutting of lead-containing coatings or materials outdoors. This operation is considered a Type 2A operation only if it is short-term, not repeated, and if the material has been stripped before welding or high-temperature cutting. Otherwise, it will be considered a Type 3A operation. Removal of lead-containing coatings or materials by scraping or sanding using non-powered hand tools. Manual demolition of lead-painted plaster walls or building components by striking a wall with a sledgehammer or similar tool. There is also Type 2B operations, which only include spray application of lead-containing coatings. This is not something we expect to encounter in our work. In Type 3A operations, welding or high-temperature cutting of lead-containing coatings or materials indoors or in a confined space. Burning of a surface containing lead. Dry removal of lead-containing mortar using an electric or pneumatic cutting device. Removal of lead-containing coatings or materials using power tools without an effective dust collection system equipped with a HEPA filter. Removal or repair of a ventilation system used for controlling lead exposure. Demolition or cleanup of a facility where lead-containing products were manufactured. An operation that may expose a worker to lead, dust, fume or mist that is not a Type 1, Type 2, or Type 3B operation. Type 3B operations consist of abrasive blasting of lead-containing coatings or materials, removal of lead-containing dust using an air mist extraction system. The employers, supervisors, and workers should be able to recognize and classify lead-containing operations to provide appropriate respirators, measures and procedures. Respirator requirements are listed in Table 1 for Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3 operations in the Ontario Guideline for lead on construction projects. In the lead regulations, general procedures must in place as it relates to wash-up facilities, the use of a drop sheet and any eating, drinking, smoking and gum chewing. The general procedure must include the use of a HEPA vacuum in the abatement operations. 500 milligrams in one shift is all you need to be overexposed to lead. This picture highlights how much 500 milligrams is in comparison to a nickel. When that amount is rubbed into the hands, you cannot see it. The general procedures must include: clean up work area regularly to avoid accumulation. Waste containers must be used the following. Regular cleanup must be dust tight. The container must be identified as lead waste and must be cleaned it with a wet cloth, HEPA vacuum before leaving the work area. The procedure must include that the worker must be inspected once per day. Respirators should not be necessary if the general procedures listed in Section 6.1 of the Ontario Lead Guidelines for construction projects are followed and if the level of lead in the air is less than 0.05 milligrams per cubic meter. However, if the worker wishes to use a respirator, a half-mask particulate respirator with N, RRP series filter, and 95, 99 or 100% efficiency should be provided. Type 2A operations include welding or high-temperature cutting of lead containing coatings or materials outdoors. This operation is considered a Type 2A operation only if it is short-term, not repeated, and if the material has been stripped before welding or high-temperature cutting. Otherwise, it will be considered a Type 3A operation. Removal of lead containing coatings or materials by scraping or sanding using non-powered hand tools. Manual demolition of lead-painted plaster walls or building components by striking a wall with a sledgehammer or similar tool. Type 2B operations include spray application of lead-containing coatings. Before work begins, you must refer to the Ministry of Labor, Training, Skill and Development, lead guidelines and the Clifford lead abatement procedure. Personal protective equipment must be worn so workers are not taking lead home. Workers must remove work clothing at the end of the day. Avoid shaking dust off the clothing as this can be a significant source of exposure to lead dust, and do not wash up at home. The wash-up should be done in a wash-up area on the job. Researchers at NIOSH found that children of lead-exposed construction workers were 6 times more likely to have lead levels over the recommended limit than children whose parents did not work in lead-related industries. Lead is of particular concern for workers with young children since it has been shown to cause a variety of health problems in children, ranging from behavioral disorders to brain damage. The risk to children is particularly high because they frequently put their hands in their mouth, thereby increasing their exposure, and because their bodies quickly absorb lead into their systems. The study examined 31 children of lead-exposed workers and a control group of 19 children of unexposed workers. This study found that 50% of the workers reported changing out of work clothes prior to leaving work. In addition, most workers, 79%, wore at least some street clothes at work and almost all, 91%, washed these clothes at home. Finally, only 18% reported always showering before leaving work. The procedure for Type 3 operations must include: follow the Type 2 procedures plus partial or full enclosures, a decontamination facility, general mechanical ventilation such as fans fitted with effective dust collectors, a wet method of removal, and I don't understand the following: a HEPA vacuum for abrasive blasting of debris. I don't understand the last phrase. Type 3A operations include welding or high-temperature cutting of lead-containing coatings or materials indoors or in a confined space. Burning of a surface containing lead. Dry removal of lead-containing mortar using an electric or pneumatic cutting device. Removal of lead-containing coatings or materials using power tools without an effective dust collection system equipped with a HEPA filter. Removal or repair of a ventilation system used for controlling lead exposure. Demolition or cleanup of a facility where lead-containing products were manufactured. An operation that may expose a worker to lead, dust, fume or mist that is not a Type 1, Type 2, or Type 3B operation. Type 3B operations include abrasive blasting of lead-containing coatings or materials. Removal of lead-containing dust using an air mist extraction system. Employers, supervisors, and workers should be able to recognize and classify lead-containing operations in order to provide appropriate respirators, measures, and procedures. Respirator requirements are listed in Table 1 for Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3 operations. To summarize, this program reviewed the following: lead, and how it is used, the routes of exposure, the health effects to exposed workers, the legislation and guidelines here in Ontario, the review of lead operations and how to develop safe working procedures when exposed to lead. Congratulations, you are almost done. Now it's time to answer the following questions to complete the training.